People are always asking for my opinion, like my real take on police reform. And usually I just kind of overly simplify and say, well, it's a waste of time. It's hard for me to kind of articulate why I think some of these ideas are a waste of time, or why I think this push, because people act like, oh, we need to reform the police now. Like, we need to get this done. If we don't get this done, the world's going to end. And they act like it's the most important thing in the world. I'm like, no, it's really not. And one of the reasons is that I try to tell people all the time, the police have been reforming themselves more than you know for like forever. And it's hard for me to like kind of put my finger on some of these things and like point out examples, because, you know, I've been a cop for over a decade now, and things have been kind of like slowly changing. Like every time there's a bad incident, something changes, or something happens where we learn from it. We change policy. We change how we do things. This is like the natural evolution of law enforcement. And it's the reason that I think that, well, we don't get credit for making changes, is because the changes have been happening so slowly that if you look over from year 1 to year 10, the changes appear to be drastic. But if you look at any 1 year in between, they're minimal and almost impossible to pinpoint. And that's one thing that I try to tell people when I'm talking about police reform. But here's an example where I can actually show you kind of concrete things that why these reforms are not even shouldn't even consider reforms. I think this is more, and it's probably more appropriate to say that modern calls for police reform by lawmakers is more of a political posturing than it is anything that has to do with actual reform. And there's a funny ally that the police have in this particular article that I'd like to point out. So here's an article from Columbus, Ohio. It says, City Council approves adding officers' names to alternative uniforms and limiting the use of military-style equipment. Let's get into the story here. It says, Columbus City Council has approved 2 pieces of legislation designed to bring changes to the city's police department. The first ordinance will require officers' names and badges to be placed on alternate uniforms, such as riot gear. Now, when I posted something on Twitter about this the other day, because there was, I think, like a triple homicide in the news right about the same time that this came out. I was like, well, good. It's good to see City Council is focusing on these riots that happened 2 years ago and punishing the police for that, rather than focusing on the homicides that are happening right now in this city, which are still at or near record levels, which began to climb at 2020 when all of this police reform talk began. And I was confronted by somebody who said, oh, well, you don't like accountability. No, dumbass. That's not what it is at all. Because this isn't about accountability either. So the reason I say that is because the Columbus Police Department 2 years ago already changed their policy and made the officers go out and put their names on the front and back of their riot gear. If you look at any of the riot footage, there's a white piece of tape across the back of their helmet that has their name on it. They're also required to put a white piece of tape on the front of their uniform. They also gave them yellow reflective vests and had to write in black magic marker their name and badge. So this has been part of policy for the better part of 2 years. But now politicians are making it a law so that they can come out and say, oh, well, this is a police reform. Like, this is important police reform. We need to do this. No. It is a complete waste of time, because the police already changed prior to you making this a law. So it's dumb. One of the other things, let's see, the second ordinance proposed by President Pro Temp Liz Brown would limit the use of military-style equipment and tactics used by police. That includes chemical agents, helicopters, explosives, and pyrotechnics. One of the things that I saw, it wasn't in this particular article, it says that now the helicopter is going to be required to run more quietly and avoid residential areas. So the Columbus Police Department has a helicopter, and President Pro Temp Liz Brown has made it her mission to make the helicopter go away. For some reason, she hates officer safety because the helicopter is there so that when officers are responding to a call such as a burglary in progress, which a burglary in progress is when bad guys break into a house that's occupied by people. And these are often calls where you have, citizens in their houses hiding in an upstairs bedroom because they're afraid that there's people that have broken their house that are trying to harm them. Officers are rushing into scene to try to help these people. Often the helicopter is doing circles around the house so that if anybody tries to flee, they can call out those people to the officers. It also is very common for the helicopter to go in on a gun run, a person with a gun, somebody with a gun threatening people. The helicopter will often go in before the officers get there, call out the individual with the firearm. If that person takes off running, the helicopter is able to tell the officers where that person ran, which way they're facing, what it is that they're doing, so that the officers can be safe while they're doing their job. By the way, this also makes the community more safe because it gets these dangerous people off the streets. For some reason, Liz Brown does not like officers being safe when they're doing their job, so she's made it her life's mission to try to get rid of the helicopter. So congratulations, Liz Brown. You passed an ordinance that's going to restrict use of the helicopter. Congratulations. You should be really proud of yourself. One of the things that I thought was funny in this article, it says, this is from criminal defense attorney Sam Shemansky. Now, I've talked on this channel before about the interesting relationship that police officers often have with criminals. I've never really talked about the relationship that they have with defense attorneys, but typically it's not a very positive relationship. Now, I've never had to work with a defense attorney such as Sam Shemansky. Most of the defense attorneys that I've had to deal with have been moronic public defenders, and I've had to raise my voice at times when dealing with some of these public defenders because some of the things that they do is dumb. Sam Shemansky has a very good reputation for being a very professional, very high-skilled defense attorney in the city, and has a reputation for making sure that his clients get the minimal sentence as possible if they are even convicted. And I'm going to put it there and leave it that way. So he was asked about these changes and what he thinks. And this is somebody who is representing some of the protesters who are suing the city for their response to the riots. He said the identification thing is good. The second prong, limiting their resources, is a more questionable approach. It's difficult for everyday people to understand what it's like to deal with, call it a mob, call it a crowd, call it what you want, but it's a harrowing situation and we thrust the police officers into, and there's no way you can train for that. So wouldn't it be nice if more people were level-headed like defense attorney Sam Shemansky? I don't know. We live in such an upside down world right now, but I don't know. This story, I just thought it was interesting, and it also showed me an opportunity to point out from my perspective that these people who are calling for reform and putting reform bills out there, they don't necessarily know what it is that they're doing. They don't know the ramifications or the consequences of what it is that they're putting forth. And also they're putting it forth for show because they want people to believe that they're doing something to help the community, even though a lot of these changes were put into policy prior to this becoming law, making this law a complete waste of time. But the people who are putting forth these laws don't care if they're wasting their time. They just want to put forth the appearance that they're doing something. I think those are going to be my thoughts for today. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.